Rashi cited the Midrash. Usually, when the Torah speaks about a person doing something or is engaged in some mitzvah activity, he's always referred to as Ish. But yet over here, the Torah refers to this person as Odom. Odom, which is unusual. So Rashi cites the Midrash that this is to indicate that when you bring a sacrifice, it cannot be stolen. It must be your asset. Just as Odom, when he brought a korban, the first day he was created, on the sixth day of creation, he brought korbanos, he brought a korban, and at that time, everything was his because he was the only human being. Identically, when we bring a korban, it should be similar to Odom. That's Rashi cites the Chazal, the Midrash. The Orach Chaim HaKodesh cites the Midrash Tanchuma. The Midrash Tanchuma says differently, that the reason why we're able to bring the korban is because he asks a question. Adam himself, we find that after he ate of the tree of knowledge, he was driven from the Garden of Eden. Why did Hashem give him a chance? Give him an option, do tshuva, bring a korban, you'll be atoned, and you can remain there. Why was he not subject to atonement after he'd eaten from the Eitz HaDas? So he explains that we know that you're able to bring a korban if it's only in the context of shogeg, only if the transgression took place on an inadvertent level. But if it's deliberate, korban has no relevance. You cannot be atoned. Adam, because when he ate of the tree of knowledge, his level of clarity was on such an almost absolute level, it could not be attributed to him that this was inadvertent. It was due to he chose with his own level of justification to eat of the tree of knowledge. Therefore, Adam himself wasn't able to bring a korban because it was considered deliberate. However, we, being his descendants and being affected due to the consequence of his action, therefore, we're able to bring the korban. Adam, because of what Adam had done, this Midrash Tanchuma, therefore, we're able to bring the korban because the concept of being inadvertent has relevance to us, which had no relevance to himself. That's Adam Kiyak. Only because we are the descendants of Adam do we have relevance to, we have this natural blind spot that either we're not fully focused or whatever it is. Therefore, we have relevance to bring a korban, and he could not bring the korban. For that reason, therefore, he was driven out of the Gan Eden, out of Garden of Eden, after he ate of the tree of knowledge. It's interesting. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, the Adam, when he ate of the tree of knowledge, min hoyo. Min means he was considered like a heretic. Why was he considered a heretic? Gemara just says min hoyo. So the way I understood it was that a human being has the ability to actually, although we know things, we're able to suppress that thought and behave as if that reality doesn't exist. We live our own realities. A person has that ability. If a person wants to do something enough, we can delude ourselves and behave in a way as if the fact doesn't exist. That's the ability of a human being. Adam, because he was God's handiwork, he was in the Garden of Eden. The question is, knowing and sensing God's presence to such a degree, how do you eat the tree of knowledge? And what could be the justification? The answer is the only way he could have eaten of the tree of knowledge, he had to suppress that fact at that moment like God didn't exist. And because God didn't exist at that moment, therefore he was able to cross that line. Because if he would have had any sense of Hashem's presence when he attempted to eat of the tree of knowledge, there's no justification. It's impossible to justify it. So he had to somehow push God out of his mind as if Hashem did not exist at that moment. Only therefore was he able to eat of the tree of knowledge. There's a famous story with Aristotle that the Rambam held that Aristotle was a level of genius that he was able to come upon certain concepts that even prophets were only able to come upon those levels of truth because God communicated those truths to them. Aristotle was such a dimension of genius, he was able through his own genius to come upon those truths. But yet, one time they caught Aristotle, he was committing adultery. So they asked him, Aristotle, how do you do such a thing? He says, when I committed adultery, I wasn't Aristotle. That's it. He was so overwhelmed by desire at that moment, his intellect was not in operation at that moment. That's what it was. A person can have enough desire to do something, even though something is blatantly clear, almost at absolute level, you're able to somehow to suppress it and push it out of your mind. Therefore, Adam, at that time, he was min. However, that's called deliberate. When a person violates on a deliberate level, you're not able to bring a korban whatsoever. I mentioned yesterday, in the name of the Rechaim HaKodesh, in the name of the Ramak, Moshe Kordoviro, that he writes in Talmud Dvorah that when a person sins and he brings the korban, we know there are three aspects to a korban. There's the consecration, there's the leaning on the korban, you lean on the animal, that's called smicha. When you do the vidui, when you make the confession, and then afterwards you sacrifice either the whole animal or you sacrifice the innards, which include the kidneys. So when you lean on, what is the whole concept of leaning on the animal? When you lean on the animal, you do tshuva, the impurity of the sin that the person had sinned, because we say when you sin, we say Aveira Goris Aveira. And we mentioned many times the name of the Zohar, which Rav Chaim Volozhin cites in Nefesh HaChaim. When you sin, it creates an impure force, and that impure force creates a level of addiction, which brings you to do more of the same. When you do tshuva, and you bring the korban, and you lean on that korban, that impurity transfers from the person's body, goes onto the animal itself. So if a person transgresses inadvertently, the level, intensity of that impurity is not the ultimate level. Therefore, the korban is acceptable. You burn it, and you're atoned. However, if it's for a sin, which is bemazed, which is deliberate, the level of impurity is so extreme. If that impurity goes on the animal is considered a putrefied animal. It's not acceptable to bring as a korban. Therefore, you're only able to bring a korban with shogeg, not mazed for that reason. This is the understanding. This is the way the Rechaim HaKodesh explains why korban is only relevant if it's shogeg, not mazed for that reason. We'd mentioned that the Sor LaZozel, which carried the sins, that was the goat that was thrown down the mountainside, carried all the sins of the Jewish people. It had such an intense level of impurity, and that's why the person who transported it into the desert to throw down the mountain, he himself was contaminated by it. But what happened? How did that korban wasn't a korban? The Ramban speaks lengthily there. It wasn't a korban, but rather it was a gift to Satan, that Satan shouldn't prosecute Klal Yisrael. That's what it was all about. And he gives a mashal, an allegory. A king is making a banquet for his closest friends, and the servants, he's concerned, may come and disrupt the banquet. So what does he do? He says, you go, I'll give you something to eat, go somewhere else. So the servants are busy or preoccupied with eating what they're eating, and they don't come and they don't disrupt the banquet. The Sultan is the prosecutor of the Jewish people. By giving him the Sor LaZozel, which carries all this impurity, which exactly is the fear of Satan, it's not a korban. And the Rambam makes it a point, it's not a korban, because one was not permitted to bring a korban outside of the Mishkan or outside the Beis HaMikdash. It's only a distraction. It's like when we say shochad, it's like giving bribery to Satan. He's preoccupied, and because he's preoccupied, he will not prosecute on Yom Kippur, and therefore you're able to bring about the level of rachman which is needed to fully reinstate Klal Yisrael on Yom Kippur. That's why it's Yom Kippur for that reason. Okay, this is the Ramban. So again, we see there, it's not a korban because it atones even for deliberate sins. A deliberate sin to bring a korban for that in the Beis HaMikdash or in the Mishkan is not acceptable. Therefore, it's only if it's shogeg, so Odom. It's Odom because Odom had eaten of the tree of knowledge, and we being his descendants, we're compromised. Our level of sensitivity is compromised. Therefore, we have relevance to shogeg, which he did not have relevance to the inadvertent level. When a person passes away, and he lived a life where his merits are greater than his demerits. He passes away at tzaddik. He goes to what we call Olam Haba. The Olam Haba is not really the true future world. The future world will come about the 8,000th year. That's called Olam HaNeshamos. It's a holding pattern. The neshama goes there, and until Hashem will resurrect the dead, the neshama basks in the radiance of Hashem. The body is decomposing in the earth. Okay? Only in the year when Hashem will resurrect the dead, body and soul will be reunited, and that entity will exist eternally in that new world which Hashem will create. 1 second. When Adam made Eitz Hadas and he putrefied himself, and he brought that impurity, that evil within himself, if man is eternal, meaning you have that relation with Hashem, God has nothing to do with anything that's evil. So if the ultimate reward is having that relation with Hashem, and you possess that evil, you can't have the relationship. So what does Hashem do? He causes the person to die. The person decomposes, and when he's resurrected, that evil remains in the ground. So when he's resurrected, the soul can be reunited with the body, and ultimately that body soul is eternal. But the body now can be fully integrated with the neshama to have relation with God, because that evil is no longer there. That's the understanding. As a result of that, when we say in the second bracha of Shmon Esrei, Melech me'mis u'mechayeh u'matzmich Yeshua. You hear this? We say this every day. Melech me'mis u'mechayeh u'matzmich Yeshua. God, the king, takes life to resurrect it. You hear this? So taking the life is the ultimate chesed. If he wouldn't take life, we cannot be part of eternity. We can never have that special relationship with him, body and soul. It's only because he's memis, he takes life to be mechayeh. And when he's mechayeh, when he resurrects, that evil is not part of that new existence, that physical body. That evil remains in the ground, only for the purpose that the body and soul could actually bask in the radiance of Hashem for all eternity. That's the understanding. The Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that before Tchias HaMesim, Moshe Rabbeinu did not decompose. Aaron did not decompose. But the moment before resurrection, any human being that existed will decompose and instantaneously be resurrected. Because that Moshe Rabbeinu died, he had to die only because he was a descendant of Adam. That's why he didn't live forever. Because he has to die. That's the process to extract that evil from his being, and then being resurrected, he's resurrected as pure. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, in the grave, he doesn't decompose. The moment before resurrection, because resurrection is to have that special relation, body and soul, for all eternity, even Moshe Rabbeinu decomposes to dust and immediately is resurrected. So Melech me'mis u'mechayeh u'matzmich Yeshua. That is the chesed of Hashem. He only takes the life to be mechayed. That's the whole concept of death, for the sake of resurrection. So let's say a non-Jew has to be special to be resurrected, to be part of eternity. Every Jew, every Jew, the only time he doesn't have a share in the world, God forbid, he has to forfeit it. But naturally we have, because we're descendants of Avraham and Yaakov, so we naturally have a right to that relationship. You have to really mess up badly, God forbid, to forfeit that relationship. A non-Jew has to earn that relationship. He has to be from Chasidi Umas Olam. He has to be something very special. Otherwise, he has no relevance to that relationship. So when God takes the non-Jew, Melech Memis, it's not to be Mechayeh. He's Memis when he takes the life, never to be resurrected. That person goes into the oblivion. The Jew, when he takes his life, it's to be Mechayeh. It's only to have the ultimate opportunity to be able to have a relation with Hashem, body and soul. The Ramchal writes something interesting, that why when a person dies, the soul goes to, it's called Olam and Neshamos, to the soul world. It's a holding pattern. Why does the body have to be resurrected? Tchias HaMesim is the 13th tenet of Jewish belief. A Jew has to believe in what? In Tchias HaMesim. If one does not believe in Tchias HaMesim, resurrection, you have no share in the world to come. Why is that? One of the tenets of Jewish belief is schar v'onish, reward and punishment. So the Ramchal explains resurrection is part of reward and punishment. Every time we're challenged, is it only the soul makes the decision? Is only involved in that to meet the challenge. The body's also. A person has a desire to violate. I mean, the body participates in the suppression of that desire. So how does the soul reward? How is the body not rewarded? Therefore, schar v'onish says that the body has to be rewarded no less than the soul. Therefore, ultimately, to merit the ultimate reward, the body has to be resurrected. Because if it's not resurrected, it's a failing in schar v'onish. Is that how Ramchal explains it? That's why Tchias HaMesim is a fundamental in Jewish belief, because that's an aspect of schar v'onish. So Hashem is melech menis to be mechayeh. Because the only way you could be part of that eternity, you have to die to be resurrected, because only then is the body in a position to be reunited with the neshama, and together they're fully integrated to be able to benefit from the radiance of Hashem. That's the understanding.
So
we find that Avram, we find the term Vayikra b'Shem Hashem. He called name of God. Yitzchak ultimately was Vayikra b'Shem Hashem. So the Sefarno and the commentators explain that means outreach. He went out and he did outreach. He disseminated monotheism. And he made many converts from paganism to monotheism. Yaakov, once he had his family, the 12 tribes, he was not involved in that at all. Why? Because once there was the infrastructure of Klal Yisrael, they themselves were an entity that they generated a level of spirituality that the world could be beneficiaries of what they generated. Because we are this power station, which gives out all this energy, which makes truth available to the world. Now it's up to them to choose. Until then, the message or the intensity of God's presence wasn't sufficient in this world that they were able to find him unless we brought it to them. Once Yaakov had his sons and we focus on advancing our own spirituality, the world, the beneficiaries of our level of holiness. That's what it is. So the light unto the nations is, if the Jew himself, the Jewish people would be at that special level, the world would see it differently. We say, Tefillin Shel Rosh, Ki Shem Hashem Nikra Alecha Yoreh Mimeko. When the nations of the world see the Shem Hashem Nikra Alecha is called upon you, they will revere you. And the Gemara says, what is Ki Shem Hashem Nikra Alecha? This is Tefillin Shel Rosh. Since the majority of Shakai is the Tefillin Shel Rosh, when they see that, they will revere you. Why will they revere us? Because they will see us, we are God's people. So when we're at that special level, they will appreciate who we are. And as a result of that, they will be beneficiaries to make those better choices. It'll be easier to make the choices. So the light on the nations doesn't mean to go out do outreach with the non-Jew. We have to do outreach to make sure the Jew is a better Jew. That's the focus of a Jew. Kol Yisrael Ravens Elazar. Jews are responsible for one another. It doesn't say the Jews are responsible for the world. We're not responsible for the world. It's only through our behavior we generate a level of purity. It's like the wind comes and clears the smog. So now there's no longer smog. You're able to see. The more we advance ourselves spiritually, we are greater light. The beacon becomes stronger. And God's presence, it makes the choice easier for them. However, but there's always choice. Because that is a Jewish people, that is the choice. You want to be an anti-Semite or you want to see it differently. The anti-Semite, although he knows the Jews, he knows there's a representation, Jews believe in what they believe in, and they know there's a history. If you read about the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, they did their research on Judaism and they knew many things about the Jewish people. And that's exactly why they wanted to snuff it out. And that's why it was known Hitler says that as long as the Jews have their religion, they're eternal people. We have to destroy it. And therefore, it was known that when the Nazis went into Vilna, there was a famous printing press. It was called Achim Rom Va'almona. The brothers Rom and the widow. They were the printers of the Vilna Shas. They printed the Vilna Shas. The first things the Nazis did when they went into Vilna, they destroyed that printing press, that the Talmud can no longer be printed. For that reason, because they understood as long as we're connected to that, they can't annihilate us. Once they sever that connection, then we're vulnerable, and maybe they could annihilate us. We find throughout history, whenever they issued decrees, the decree was always relating to our Judaism. We couldn't live as Jews. You're not privy to study Torah, not privy to circumcise yourself, because this is the jugular vein. They understood that if that is intact, we become invincible. Once they undermine that, now we become vulnerable, and maybe they could destroy us. That's the understanding. So that's a choice. Do you value that? Do you revere that? Or do you want to snuff it out? Unfortunately, throughout history.
But again, I'm sorry, but what's their end game? What are they? So they see, let's say there's well-intentioned non-Jew recognizes that the Jews are a light to the nation, isn't an anti-Semite, holds us in high esteem.
Let me tell you something. The Gemara says at the end of time, God will resurrect all humanity. All humanity. It's called the final day of judgment. And then he will explain why, because they will all recognize then what they weren't willing to see all along, and they'll see God as the omnipotent, and everything emanates from him. And then he sends them to the oblivion. They will all come to realization what they missed, and after they realize that, who God is, that's called Yichud Hashem, then they go into the oblivion forever.
So that's that's the last moment of year 7,999.
Yes, that's before the world goes out of existence for the 1,000 years. The 8,000th, only those who are worthy to be part of eternity are they going to be there, body and soul. The rest of them, there's not going to be a trace of them, because there's no remnant, because they only exist because God wills existence. Oblivion means they don't exist any longer. He doesn't will whatever they were. There's no basis for their existence any longer.
So not to get too far flung into the reaches of Zohar, but how does the soul that comes to this earth, who determines whether he gets the life of a non-Jew or the life of a Jew?
Everything's dependent on the soul. The Jewish souls and non-Jewish souls. A Jewish soul is a different dimension of soul.
I'm saying, but
a Jewish soul.
So we all reincarnated as Jewish souls?
Yes, of course.
In other words, so a non-Jewish soul is reincarnated as a non-Jewish soul, and a Jewish soul is
correct. I mean, a Jewish soul, God forbid, when it's reincarnated, you can be reincarnated into a stone. You could be, and that's part of punishment. A Jewish soul could be reincarnated into a fish, into an animal, which is not great. It's better than a stone. The worst level, not that I'm an expert in Zohar, but the Orach Chaim HaKadosh writes, you can only be reincarnated 4 times. After the 4th time, there's no longer, that soul cannot be reincarnated. The worst level location to be reincarnated is into a snake, into a reptile, because the Nachash, because of the original sin, is a species which is the most extreme level of representation of being the antithesis of spirituality, because he tripped up Adam originally. So the soul to be put in that environment, it's the worst level of suffering. A fish is the best. Coming back as human is the best, because you still have choice. You can make corrections on what you didn't correct in the previous life. If you come back into a non-functioning entity like a human being, a fish, an animal, A stone, it's an incarceration. It's the environment. The fish is the purest because water is purity. The animal is next best. The human being is the ultimate. The reptile is the worst.
So Rabbi, just on that